It's clearly easier for women today than it was in the 70s or 80s because there are more women in positions of power, and it's never easy to be the only woman sitting around the table when executive decisions are made, the only woman sitting around the boardroom, the only woman, in any position carries an unreasonable burden of singularity. And I think there's been ample research to suggest that diversity increases the quality of decision making because you get a variety of viewpoints and experiences that are batting around the different ideas. So it is easier, but it isn't yet a level playing field, and the numbers bear that out. Well, it was actually easier for me to take over than I think it might have been, let's say, for Donald Graham from his mother, Catherine, because my father really never wanted to be CEO. He wanted to be editorial director and chief creative officer, and kind of found himself with what was initially to be a magazine having evolved into a corporation. So he was very happy to hand off more management-oriented responsibilities, initially to an outside president and COO, who I then succeeded in that role and then ultimately took over the CEO position. So we're pretty complementary in that he wants to have spheres of influence that are more creative and promotional, whereas my spheres of influence are more strategic and operational. Well, a lot of my experience certainly came from, as the expression goes, MBWA, management by walking around. And coming into a family business, I had entree to executives across the company that gave me the opportunity to learn the business from the ground up. But I did also go to a number of programs, a management policy program at MIT, a marketing program at UCLA Graduate School, a finance program, and from the beginning have chosen to be active in different conferences and networking with people in a variety of industries. I think management requires flexibility and an arsenal of skills, but I would say that I do believe that persuasion is better than dictation. I do believe that treating people with respect and graciousness is both right and the right way to do things. And I do believe that getting as much input as possible before you make decisions leads to better decision making. I'd like to think I've gotten better at almost everything. We all do. I think at the heart of who I am as a person, which affects who I am as a manager, has probably remained pretty consistent. I do think early on, because in part of who I am as a person, which is someone who is more open and more communicative, in retrospect, I probably communicated too much, which sounds sort of counterintuitive, but I think, for example, during the early years when Playboy was in financial difficulty and we were turning around the company, I felt it was incumbent on me to sort of tell the employees all the problems that we were struggling with. And with the passage of time, I came to realize that actually people were less interested in hearing about my problems and were interested in knowing that I had solutions. One of the tools that I developed was something called What's Going On, which was kind of a weekly report card to say, here's what we've accomplished over the last week, here's what we're working on. So it isn't about not communicating, and we do, for example, all-employee meetings every year where I go to all of our locations and meet with all the employees, and they can ask questions, which they can write down on cards ahead of time anonymously, so I hear what's on their mind, and they get a sense of perspective from me on what's going on. The two most important decisions that I've made were the strategic decisions to, first of all, move beyond the focus that all great magazines historically have embraced, which is if you have a great magazine, you grow as a publishing company, and taking the company into television, and then secondly in the 90s taking the company online, because our financial success comes from our ability to leverage into the electronic media, which is a higher margin, higher growth business. So you'd have to say that those were probably, the most important decisions that we made. And we're a small enough company that we don't have a lot of freeboard. So if either of those decisions had been wrong, you wouldn't be interviewing me here today. I think it'll be critical, but not the growth driver. But I think that it is the brand driver and creates a lot of the iconic content, and that indeed most good magazine publishers today understand that they are in the transportation business. So they need to take their brand and their content into other places than just the printed magazine. I'm a believer that great magazines will survive. I think certain kinds of magazines, news weeklies for example, are struggling to find what their role is in a world in which people are getting their news 24/7. But great magazines, whether it's Playboy or Vanity Fair, I think are going to continue to have a role because it's a different experience reading a magazine than going onto a website.